Hello guys, welcome back to my programming series where we look at programming principles in practice. So today we're going to start off with variables. Now just a little bit of background on variables. So variables are just a way to store data, okay? That's how we can store data in a program, and they're usually named. So if you remember algebra in as you're doing math, the way that you assign, let's say x equals 2, that's kind of like how variables work. It's like you've given x the value 2, and we'll come to see that in our practice. So I'll just switch to Visual Studio Code, where we'll start with Python, right? So First things first, after you install your Visual Studio Code, there are some two extensions that I use. So you can just click this extension tab here, just type Python, and so I just use this extension, Python. You can install it, as well as Python debugger. That's just a prerequisite for you. I'll also link the place where you can download Visual Studio Code for Python, and Visual Studio for C++. I'll just put the links in the description below so that you can be able to follow them up. So as I said before, we'll be contrasting C++ and Python, and one of the major differences that you'll find in these two languages is syntax. So syntax is basically how you write the language, right? It's the same way that when you write French, they have a French alphabet. There's a way that you arrange your sentences in contrast to English. So it's the same way. In Python, there's a way that you have to declare your variables, or there's a way that you have to write your code in contrast with C++. And that's one of the things that will be the major difference that we'll be seeing across the board. So as we look at variables, there are some things that will be similar across the board, and there's some that will not be. So I'll just dive right into it so that we can see the difference. First of all, for any variable, there's usually something called a data type. So a data type is basically what type of information am I storing. So a computer needs to know what type of information it's storing so that it knows how it can process it. Yeah. So coming back here into Python, so I'll just zoom in so that anyone can see. So these are the data types that are available. Okay. So we have integers, we have float, we have boolean, we have double and character, and then we have string. So integers, floats, and boolean are available in both Python and C++. So in this case, I'll be looking majorly at the primitive data types, the base data types that we'll be looking at. So integers, I think that's fairly. So integers, I believe that's fairly straightforward. It's just an integer. 2, 3, even negatives are included in this case, right? Float is basically a decimal number, right? So 1.2, 3.5, anything that has a decimal point can be a float, okay? And then boolean is basically either true or false. That's the extent of it. It's either true or false. And then we have double and character. These are primitive data types only in the C++ language. So double basically means a big float number, right? Later we'll come to see that the major difference is how many bytes. The major difference between float and double is how many bytes there are. That is something that you can look at later. Then for character, is basically a single character, quite literally, right? So C, D, just one single character, and you can see that's how you would normally write it. And then we have our string. So string, this is specifically in Python. right? String is a primitive data type, and you basically write it in double quotes or single quotes. It's also allowed. Same for character. It's usually I prefer character with a single quote, but it can also be written in a double quote. So as we go along this, you'll be seeing how we'll be contrasting the two, Python and C++, how we'll be writing these different data types. So I'll start off with Python because it's fairly straightforward, easier to look at and see. So we are going to start off with Python, right? So I've already written this beforehand. So we have x equals 2, which is an integer. So for Python, whenever you put a hashtag, that means the following characters will be a comment. And a comment means basically this is for us to interpret. The program will not read that as actual code. That is just for us to read. So for example, if there's some logic that you've put and you put a comment, you'll be putting it for the sake of someone else who comes to read your code. But the code, as it's compiling, as it's trying to run, it will ignore that section of comments, right? So this is just a one-line comment. So you can see in Python, when you declare the floats, you can see here we declare, for example, x, and we give it the value 2. Okay, so that's kind of like algebra. You have x equals 2. So x is the variable that we've assigned the value to. And for Python, it will be able to interpret that this value is an integer. That's something called dynamic typing. It's basically able to tell by default that this must be an integer. It's just inferring what data type it is. For you can declare this again, y equals 2.4, which will be a float, and z equals 2, which will be a boolean, right? So if we try to contrast this with C++, so I'll just open it here. So let's take a look at C++. In this case, you can see there's a bit of a difference between Python if you try and contrast them. In C++, you have to declare the data type. So as you can see here, we have int x equals 2, int representing integer. So you have to declare that this variable is supposed to be an integer. In C++, it's called static typing. Basically, you have to declare that this is a specific data type. Okay. Same for float. This is the way it's written. Same for boolean. This is the way it's written. It's written in short form, bool. And then we can see here there's also how you comment in C++. So you can see here for commenting in C++, it's double slashes. Okay. And that's how you declare. For the rest of the C++ variables, we have character, which I'm just going to give m equals, let's say, c, for example. Also, you can see for C++ here, we have a semicolon right after every line that you declare. So basically that shows that this is the end of this command, this instruction that I'm giving for the program. Then we can also have, so there's character and there's also double, which, like I said, double is just like a larger value of a float. Okay, something like that. And then when we look also at Python, for Python we say that there's also something called string, right? So string, let's say give it the value m, and then you can use a double quote, hello world, for example. So that's a string. You can still use a single quote as well. There's really not much difference when it comes to that. And then for Python, it knows that command is complete whenever we go to a new line, so it's able to infer that we've gone to a new line. So this is a different command. So that's how it works, in contrast to C++, the way it requires you to put a semicolon to show that this is the end of this instruction. So there are very different syntaxes, as you can clearly see. And so that's how basically you define a variable in a program. So there's for example, for C++, there's something that we call variable declaration and definition. So I'll just take a look at that for a little bit. So for example, in Python, you can in C++, you can do something like int a, like that, right? So this is what we call a declaration. You see, in this case, we have not given it a value. We've just declared that there's a variable a and that we need to store a value that's an integer. So after you put your declaration, that's when you put now your definition, something like this. So this is what we call a variable definition. Now you can see here there's a red line showing us that this has an error. Mainly it's because of something that we call scope, which is something that we'll look at later. But if I put this, for example, inside what we call the main function in Python, in C++, then you'll see that error will go away, right? So basically we do a declaration saying that we have this variable that we want to store a value, right? And that variable will be an integer. Then later now we give that value, which is now our actual value, the number 10. So this is something that comes in useful later. It's not something that is available for Python, right? So in Python is more straightforward. At the moment that you're declaring it, you must give it a value. So that is a general overview of variables in Python and in C++, and just in general in programming. Obviously, in different languages, there's so many languages out there, there's different syntaxes, but I believe when you look at the contrast between the two, we cover generally how they look like, and that's mainly why I looked at both Python and C++, so that we can get that contrast of how we get high-level programming languages and low-level programming languages, how they handle their syntax, how they handle their typing. Like we've said, there's static typing and there's dynamic typing, and that's some of the differences that we'll come to realize as we go along in this journey of programming. So I hope you've enjoyed today's lesson. I hope you've gained something. I hope you've come to learn more and more, and stay tuned. We'll have more coming for you in the next episodes. See you then.